Hi, and welcome to Ethics for ACFEs. My name is David Malamed, and I am a forensic accountant and fraud investigator with over 20 years of experience. In today's course, we're going to be talking about ethical issues, how to identify them, how to deal with them, and what to do. I'm going to give you real-life examples of things that have occurred and let you make the decisions in terms of what ethical standards need to be upheld and what steps should be taken. Remember that regardless of the steps that you do take, it's very important to make sure you write it down, make a memo to file, make yourself some notes in terms of why you've chosen to go down the path you have, in the event that in the future you're questioned in terms of your steps.
Hi, my name is David Malamed, and I'm a forensic accountant and fraud investigation expert. For the next 2 hours, I'm going to be speaking to you about ethics for certified fraud examiners. Here's a nice picture of me and my contact information if you need it. Best way to connect with me by email is dmalamed, M-A-L-A-M-E-D, @cgwca.com, or you can also visit my website, www.uncoverfraud.com. So before we begin today, I'm just going to go over a bit of the requirements and a bit of housekeeping rules. So there is a 2 hours of verifiable learning activity that's required. The subject matter that we're going to discuss is relevant to your professional responsibility. If you're participating today, you're doing it on a recorded webinar. Some of you may have taken this live, and some of you may be taking this live. For your records, you're going to be provided with a copy of the receipt for payment, confirmation of attendance, a copy of a certificate of completion. And just so you know, the course material builds on an awareness of the rules, standards, or guidelines, present ethical dilemmas, models or theories of ethics, and the application of ethical decision making. So the housekeeping rules. To qualify for CPD, you must be registered individually. So if you're just watching this as a team, just for knowledge, that's fine. However, if you do want the CPD requirement, you do have to each enroll individually. There will be 5 true or false questions that must be completed at the end of this course to receive your CPE. A certificate of completion will be provided. Questions may be asked at any time during the webinar or today. If you do have any questions that linger, please feel free to send them to email me directly. And this course is set to meet your mandatory 2 hours of CFE ethics training required by the ACFE. So let's get into this. Why am I taking this course? Well, ethics are the core foundation of what CFEs bring to the general public. Why is it important to embrace this? Well, ethics are moral principles or values that govern the conduct of an individual or a group. It is not a burden to bear, but a sensible and effective guide which furthers life and success. Ethics are important, not only in business, but in academics and society. As well, it is an essential part of the foundation on which a civilized society is built. Ethical behavior is what all professional people should aim to have. Not just the ethical attribute, but exceptional behavior with this regard. This is because, as part of demonstrating your professionalism, one must be governed by the rules of ethics to safeguard oneself and others. Ethics are essential in the workplace because a tough ethical code provides a non-threatening environment with high standards. Having respect and the right attitude at work will help a person to develop not only at work ethics, but in life as well. A bit later on, we will discuss in more detail how judgment has a significant impact on the audit profession's values and services. And of course, for many of you taking this course, you want to adhere to the ACFE's CPE requirements. So today we're going to be discussing the key responsibilities and techniques in identifying concerns, Code of Ethics and Professional Codes of Conduct, why independence is critical to the credibility of CFEs, the importance of ethics in maintaining the reputation of the ACFE and of CFEs, And we're also going to look at some ethical case studies for you to work on. What is ethical training? Professional ethics is the study of the values that guide the choice and behavior of professionals. Ethics training ensures that professionals acquire the tools, methods, and framework that enable them to make decisions based on their moral principles. A roadmap for professional behavior. An ability to collectively make same or similar decisions as each other. And to ensure that you, as a professional, are aware of how to identify and deal with ethical issues. There must be a commonality in behavior for CFEs to deal with ethical issues and concerns, meaning that if something were to happen to, the same thing were to happen to two of us, we'd both react the same way. So what is the ACFE? It's an association of professionals committed to performing at the highest level of ethical conduct. Members of the association pledge themselves to act with integrity and to perform their work in a professional manner. Members have a professional responsibility to their clients, to the public interest, and each other, and we're going to get into that in more detail. It outlines the basic principles of the ethical behavior to guide members in the fulfilling of their duties and obligations. And it dictates that all members strive to demonstrate their commitment to excellence in service and professional conduct. The Code of Ethics is a must. ACFEs must do the following. So an ACFE must demonstrate a commitment to professionalism and diligence in the performance of his or her duties. ACFEs must exhibit the highest level of integrity in the performance of all professional assignments and will accept only assignments for which there is reasonable expectation that the assignment will be completed with professional competence, meaning you can't just take anything that comes your way. I know that at times for some of you who are sole proprietors or potentially partnerships, smaller businesses, that a file in the door is fantastic. However, if you're asked to do an investigation on a taxi cab company, and you've got to figure out how much money an individual should have been reporting on their taxes or should have been declaring for a divorce, you'll have to know the intricacies of the taxi business, how to get at that information, and how to do the quantification before accepting it. ACFE members must comply with lawful orders of the courts and will testify to matters truthfully and without bias or prejudice. You know, when I talk about bias, one of the things to think about is you've got to put aside your feelings towards something, and you've got to base what it is that you talk about in court or to testify to based on the evidence in front of you. An ACFE in conducting examinations will obtain evidence or other documentation to establish a reasonable basis for any opinion rendered. No opinion shall be expressed regarding the guilt or innocence of any person or party. So it's not our job to say that fraud was committed by this individual and here is the evidence supporting why we're saying that it's fraud. What we would be doing would be taking away the job from the judge. It's our job to take complex issues, to simplify them, to report on them, and to allow others to make decisions based on what it is that we have identified. An ACFE will reveal all material matters discovered during the course of an examination, which, if omitted, could cause a distortion of the facts. You can't pick and choose which facts and evidence that you've identified that you want to include in your report or to testify to. By handpicking them, you're creating a bias, and therefore your report will likely be deemed useless. The ACFE shall continuously strive to increase the competence and effectiveness of professional services performed under his or her direction. And similar to today, what you're all doing is you're learning more about the ACFE practice, you're learning more about Code of Ethics, and you're bettering yourselves and the profession. So Code of Ethics that you should not do. An ACFE shall not engage in any illegal or unethical conduct or any activity which would constitute a conflict of interest. So if you were investigating a company where if the findings had an impact on you personally, that would most likely be a conflict of interest. The ACF member shall not reveal any confidential information obtained during a professional engagement without proper authorization. You know, when I started off in accounting, I started off as an auditor. And when I would go out to do conferences, or I'd go out to meet and greet evenings and do my networking, and I tell people that I was an auditor, they weren't that interested to hear any of my stories. However, when I shifted over to doing forensics and fraud investigations, everybody wanted to know who my clients were, what I was doing, what I was working on. Now, to anonymize your stories, there's no problem. But to be able to tell which clients you've been working on, we're going to get into it later on in terms of how you assess what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. I thought we'd start with a case early on just to kind of get your feet wet. And really, we're going to go through the case, let you kind of think about it for a minute or two, and then we'll go on to the solution. So a client connects with you, letting you know that they require an independent investigation regarding allegations of fraud. The client also lets you know that you are the second CFE and expert they are coming to for help. From clarifying questions, you learn that the prior CFE firm and expert at the onset of the investigation checked and confirmed they were free of conflict. However, a week before issuing their report, the CFE identified that in fact a conflict existed and that the CPA firm, where the CFE worked, would not be able to continue the engagement and resigned. The client had paid the first CFE firm approximately $60,000 for work completed to date. Before accepting the client, you perform your own conflict check and arrange a meeting with the first expert. The first expert acknowledges their error and lets you know that the client has asked for the fees charged to be refunded. You accept the engagement but are unsure of your ethical responsibility in terms of reporting the ethical issue to your CFE association. What should you do? So now I want you to think a bit in terms of this is you in this type of position. Number one, do you have to start thinking about is there a responsibility for you to get your client back their money? Can you rely on work that's been done already? Do you need to do your own investigation? Here's the possible solution. When in doubt, report. You connect with the first CFE and let them know that there is an ethical concern regarding the client, conflict of interest, and fees charged. You let the CFE know that the client wants a refund and that they are bound by the ACFE Code of Conduct and Code of Ethics. However, the CFE takes the position that the work completed to date would be used by you in preparing your report. As a result, they are not prepared to refund the client the fees charged and don't believe they need to refund the fees. You feel you have an obligation to let your client know that they should seek legal counsel and have the right to report the matter to the ACFE Association. In addition, you cannot just rely on the work that's been done by the prior ACFE. You yourself need to go through the working papers, collect your own evidence, and come to your own findings and conclusions. The importance of ethics. There is value in the education of ethics to get the standards for our profession and protect it. As leaders in the profession, it's hard to practice ethically when you're not clear what CFEs as a group believe and practice. Today, as part of the webinar, we're going to review aspects of the CFE Code of Conduct. Do not assume that even the most senior employees know what it is and what should and should not be done. If we do not set the tone from the top, we are not setting ourselves up for success. When we talk about tone from the top, I usually begin talking about fraud policies, expense policies, and really that by having all these policies and rules in place, if leadership is not demonstrating by their behavior, then it's hard to expect other people within the organization to work in unison with whatever policy happened, because they would see that leadership doesn't respect the policies put in place. Integrity and objectivity. CFEs must conduct themselves with integrity, knowing that public trust is founded on integrity. Meaning that when we do things, we have to have a certain sense of purpose, a sense of responsibility. CFEs shall not sacrifice integrity to serve the client, their employer, or the public interest. At times, clients don't want to see certain things in reports, want to see reports have other information that might not be supported. And that is a time where, as a CFE, you've got to be able to say, no, I can do my report based on my findings. I know that you would like it to say this, this, and this, but I don't have any evidence that shows that. And if I were to just write in there that you, the client, told me what it is that you need me to do, so I did it, it's not going to create much evidence in a court. In fact, it probably won't even be accepted. Prior to accepting an engagement, the CFE must investigate for actual or potential conflicts of interest. And we're going to go into conflicts of interest, but when we talk about potential conflicts of interest, there may be what appears to be a conflict, may be just enough that the engagement should not be accepted. CFEs shall disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest to prospective clients who retain them or to their employers. Remember that you've also got a confidentiality clause in most, if not all, of the work that you do, meaning that before you go to your potentially new client saying that you've got a conflict, if you still are trying to clear that conflict through telling your original client that you would like to accept them, you do need to get permission from both sides, both parties, that you're going to reveal to the other that A, they're a client, and B, a potential conflict. CFEs must maintain objectivity within the scope of the engagement. If you're working for a client who starts taking you for lunch to play golf and more and more and more, objectivity could become a problem. CFEs shall not commit acts discreditable to the ACFE or its membership. If a CFE commits a criminal crime, that is discreditable. If a CFE acts as an advocate when they should have acted independently, it is eroding the goodwill in terms of the ACFE for us all. CFEs must conduct themselves in the best interests of the reputation of the profession, meaning that it's not just at work, but it's actually outside of work as well. CFEs shall not knowingly make a false statement when testifying under oath in a court of law or other dispute resolution forum, meaning that when you sit and act as an expert in court, you have affirmed or you've sworn to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, meaning that regardless of how it affects you or it affects your client or it affects anybody in the courtroom, you have to say what really happened. CFEs shall comply with lawful orders of the courts or other dispute resolution bodies. CFEs shall not commit criminal acts or knowingly induce others to do so. And I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. Professional competence. CFEs must be competent and must not accept assignments where competence is lacking. And we spoke about that a bit before, but I wouldn't want to see CFE doing financial modeling for an oil company if they have no energy and gas experience. It may be possible to meet the requirement for professional competence by use of consultation or referral. So if we go back to the oil and gas example, one way to engage and do the work is to potentially get an expert in oil and gas and work with them. CFEs must maintain the minimum program of continuing professional education required by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, meaning all the education that you do, the continuing education, the betterment of the profession, including today's ethics training, should be logged and should be kept because it could be audited by the ACFE. A commitment to professionalism combining education and experience must continue throughout the CFE's professional career. And that's something that you really want. You really want to continually learn more about the tools that are out there, learn more about the processes, and it will make you as a professional just better in general. And CFEs shall continually strive to increase the competence and effectiveness of their professional services. One of the things that I'm pretty core ethics valued that I truly believe in is that we need to be able to provide value add to our clients. If our clients are just asking us to help them mourn their loss or potentially prepare a report that won't be used for anything, it's our responsibility to put our hand up and let them know, hey, wait a second, I don't think that you should do this investigation or this report for the following reasons. Number one, it's useless. Number two, it's not going to be used in court. Number three, it's not instructed by your lawyer, and so on and so on. Characteristics of a professional. The CFE Code of Conduct presumes the existence of a profession. Since the word profession has lost some of its earlier precision through widespread application, it is worthwhile reviewing the characteristics which mark a calling as a professional in the traditional sense. There has been a lot of written on the subject, and court cases have revolved around it. The weight of the authorities, however, identifies the following distinguishing elements. There is mastery of a particular intellectual skill acquired by lengthy training and education. The traditional foundation of the profession rests in the provision of services to others through the application of the acquired skill to their affairs. The provision of personal services rather than entrepreneurial dealings in goods. There is acceptance of a responsibility to subordinate personnel interests to those of the public good. There is acceptance of being accountable to and governed by professional peers. There exists a developed and independent body comprising the members of the profession, which sets and maintains standards of qualification, attests to the competence of the individual members, and safeguards and develops the skills and standards of the profession. There is a specialized code of ethical conduct laid down and enforced by that body, designed principally for the protection of the public, and there is a belief on the part of those engaged in the profession in the benefit of interchanging views and in a duty to contribute to the development of their profession, adding to its knowledge and sharing advances in knowledge and technique with their fellow professionals, which we do at our conferences, which we do on networking, which we do at round tables. The CFE Mindset and Rules of Professional Conduct. The CFE Mindset includes the ethical and independence requirements in your rules of professional conduct. The rules provide ethical standards based on the following 5 key principles: objectivity, integrity and due care, competence, confidentiality, and professional behavior. The rules are designed to help maintain the profession's integrity as well as the confidence and trust of the public. Integrity is an important fundamental element. Integrity requires CFEs to be honest, candid, and straightforward with a client's information. CFEs should restrict themselves from personal gain or advantage using confidential information. While errors or differences in opinion regarding the applicability of laws do exist, CFEs avoid the intentional opportunity to deceive and manipulate information. Objectivity and independence are important ethical values for CFEs. CFEs must remain free from conflict of interest and other questionable business relationships when conducting investigative services. Failure to remain objective and independent may hinder a CFE's ability to provide an honest opinion. That being said, a CFE can be engaged as an advocate, meaning that the CFE would work as part of a company or an individual or an association or group that has an issue, but upfront within that engagement letter would let them know that they are not acting as an expert position, they're acting as an advocate. Due care is the ethical value requiring CFEs to observe all technical or ethical accounting standards. Due care requires CFEs to exercise competence, diligence, and a proper understanding of information. Competence is usually based on individuals' education and experience. Therefore, due care may require senior investigators to supervise and direct other accountants with less experience in the accounting profession. Maintaining the CFE reputation. And we're going to go through these subjects: responsibilities, the public interest, integrity, objectivity and independence, due care, and scope and nature of services. Responsibilities. In carrying out your responsibilities as professionals, members should exercise sensitive professional and moral judgment in all your activities. This principle directs CFEs to work collaboratively with other CFEs to improve both the image and practices of investigations. Part of that responsibility includes public education, helping both clients and the general public to understand the role, standards, and limitation of CFEs. The public interest. CFEs should accept the obligation to act in a way that will serve the public interest, honor the public trust, and demonstrate commitment to professionalism. rather than advocating for either clients and employers, creditors, governments, investors, and the business and the financial community at large. CFEs must strive to represent the collective well-being of all those parties. The bottom line is to have the overall public good served. Integrity. To maintain and broaden public confidence, members should perform all professional responsibilities with the highest sense of integrity. More to the point, CFEs also need to avoid even subtle misrepresentations, including misstatements by omission or by ignoring obtainable information in carrying out their duties. A CFE should never stop short of obtaining all sufficient data to provide a reasonable foundation for their conclusions or recommendations. One of the things that I think about when I talk about integrity is if you had a work plan to do your investigation and you were only halfway through and suddenly your client came to you and said, I need an opinion, I need my report now, would you issue that report? When I think about it, I don't think that I could issue that report because I have not completed my work. Maybe I could issue an interim report saying, to date, this is the information that I've identified. Please note that this is just an update of the work performed, but a supplemental report will be provided when I complete my work. Objectivity and independence. A member should maintain objectivity and be free of conflicts of interest in discharging professional responsibilities. A member in public practice should be independent in fact and appearance when providing investigative and expert services. Independence governs a CFE's ability to work with integrity and objectivity. Independence also is highly subjective. Although a CFE may demonstrate independence in appearance, acting independently, in fact, requires the CFE to be free of even potential conflict, both in action and in mental attitude, a particularly immeasurable standard. Due care. A member should observe the profession's technical and ethical standards, strive continually to improve competence and the quality of services, and discharge professional responsibility to the best of the member's ability. This principle encourages CFEs to regularly pursue continuing education, like you're doing today, especially regarding generally accepted practices in the profession. It also expands the definition of responsible and ethical work to include offering services only in the CFE's area of competence and within their level of expertise. Scope and nature of services. A member in public practice should observe the principles of the CFE Code of Professional Standards in determining the scope and nature of services to be provided. To anticipate problems arising during the performance of a job, this principle encourages CFEs to accept engagements only from clients willing to work within the technical, ethical, and professional standards included in the guiding principles. Ethical behavior. Ethical behavior exemplifies and enhances the reputation of the profession. Ethical lapses are harmful to individual CFEs, the profession, and other stakeholders. You are required to behave professionally and ethically by using an ethical reasoning process, adopting the profession's values, maintaining a stakeholder focus, adhering to laws, professional standards, and policies. Ethical behavior requires both thinking about and doing the right thing. Developing and maintaining the CFE mindset can help you adopt the frame of mind needed to behave ethically. You can think of the CFE mindset as the hat you put on when you want to demonstrate the attitudes and behaviors of a CFE. The CFE mindset is never more crucial than when you are confronted with ethical issues, which require both ethical motivation and ethical character. You should strive to be an ethical leader who proudly wears the CFE hat and avoids violating your ethical commitment by removing or forgetting about the hat when it's uncomfortable or bothersome. Assessing the situation. You can think of assessing the situation as taking a picture of the entire landscape, including possible ethical issues. It is the process of gaining an understanding of the problem, identifying key factors including ethical constraints, and planning the work to be performed. Identifying ethical issues and alternatives. Perhaps the most important aspect of assessing the situation is recognizing that you are facing an ethical issue. An ethical issue is a situation or problem in which your actions, the actions of people you advise, or the actions of an organization you help to shape might harm one or more people or stakeholder groups, or might violate what is considered to be right or good. Sometimes, ethical issues are easy to detect, such as your client pressuring you to include contradictory, unsupported evidence and findings because you believe it would misrepresent facts and mislead users. Other times, you'll be faced with ethical issues that are less obvious. Perhaps you are tired from working long hours, impairing your professional judgment, or you accidentally communicate confidential information while talking on your cell phone within earshot of the wrong person, or you heard a rumor that a manager manipulated data. You could be unaware or unsure that you are facing an ethical issue, or you might lose sight of an ethical issue because you are focusing on the other problems. The best way to get better at recognizing ethical issues is to explicitly practice looking for them. Imagine looking through the lens of your camera, searching for possible solutions and situations that can lead to harm or that might be viewed as wrong or immoral. This will be easier if you are familiar with common types of ethical issues faced by CFEs. Examples of ethical issues. So corporate scandals cause the public to question why some people run their businesses honestly and others turn into criminals. Despite the blatant appearance of some scandals, the causes of unethical practices are complex and interlocking. Some people may attempt to rob their customers blind with no qualms, while others are drawn into illegal practices gradually through ignorance or good intentions. Disconnection. Perceptions of reality are determined by daily surroundings. When working within the confines of a large company, a CFE can become wrapped up within the corporate culture of that company and lose sight of how the rest of the world is really functioning. A sense of entitlement can develop in the presence of $500 lunches and $3 million houses. When part of this culture involves financial irregularities for the benefit of the business or the individual, this can come to seem normal to someone who loses touch with how things work outside the company. Ignorance. While ignorance is no excuse for committing unethical or illegal actions, it may play a role in financial crimes. Everyone knows that you can't walk into a bank with a gun and steal the money without breaking the law. But financial regulations aren't nearly as simple. They are not simple because they quite often require interpretation, and a morally questionable individual may identify loopholes and weaknesses, allowing unethical behavior not only to be contemplated, but also committed. When you look at this list, I'm just going to touch on a few of them. There's lying or intentionally misleading others, disobeying technical or professional standards, and violating rules of professional conduct. Here are additional examples of ethical issues. So hiding information from auditors or regulators, engaging in business practices that are socially or environmentally harmful, tolerating theft, inefficiencies, or other waste of organizational resources, paying or receiving bribes. Greed. At the root of a complex matter is a very simple fact. Some people enjoy having lots of money and will break the law to get it. While it may be unfair to use the word enjoy solely, some CFEs react through desperation, stress, and pressure. But we will get into that in more detail later on during the webinar. The white-collar nature of financial crimes makes them very tempting because nobody seems to be getting hurt. The presence of large amounts of money activates the greed centers in some people's brains. Opportunity. The saying that opportunity makes the thief is applicable to crooked investigators and accountants. People who would never seek out a crime to commit under normal conditions may succumb to temptation when an opportunity is offered. Accounting sometimes involves dealing with large amounts of money, some of which can be easily hidden, siphoned off, or removed with little chance of detection. When presented with this level of temptation, some people succumb, particularly if they perceive themselves to be in a situation of financial need. Examples of ethical considerations. So what causes ethical exposures? The conditions at times increase the risk of unethical behavior. From experience, the tone at the top, poor internal controls, and a deficiency, whether due to ignorance or intention to follow a code of ethics, tends to blur right and wrong. There have been many investigations that I have led where personal relationships and poor internal controls led to the fraud. I'm not saying that is the cause of the fraud, but the opportunity and quite often the incentive to behave unethically. Whether it is expensive gifts like weekends away, familiar relationships, or poor corporate governance, it defaults to greed, opportunity, and rationalization. So just picking out a couple of these examples, there's inadequate corporate governance. We spoke about tone at the top. There's poor internal control, performance-based pay, which kind of gives that incentive, personal relationships, and gifts of preferential treatment. Examples of rationalizations for unethical behavior. In order for unethical behavior to occur, there has to be a rationalization for the action. Let's discuss some common rationalizations. Everybody does it. This rationalization has been used to excuse ethical misconduct since the beginning of civilization. It is based on the flawed assumption that the ethical nature of an act is somehow improved by the number of people who do it. And if everybody does it, then it is implicitly all right for you to do as well. Of course, people who use this reasoning usually don't believe that what they are doing is right because everybody does it. They usually are arguing that they shouldn't be singled out for attack if everybody else isn't. Since most people will admit that principles of right and wrong are not determined by polls, those who try to use this misconception are really admitting misconduct. The simple answer to them is that even assuming they are correct, when more people engage in an action that is adamantly unethical, more harm results. An individual is still responsible for his or her part of the harm. If someone really is making the argument that an action is no longer unethical because so many people do it, then that person is either in dire need of ethical instruction or is just plain ignorant. It worked out for the best. The ethical nature of an act must be evaluated when it is done, and not based on its results. Consequentialism is an open invitation to extreme the ends justify the mean conduct when even illegal conduct becomes ethical, because good consequences happen to arise out of it, even when the good was completely unintended or unpredictable. For example, snooping into the contents of your host's medicine cabinet is wrong, and the fact that you discovered a mislabeled pill bottle with rat poison in it doesn't make your violation of privacy ethical, even though it allows you to save a life. That is good fortune, not ethics. If it isn't illegal, it's ethical. A former client had me investigate a CFO that gave his girlfriend a high-paying job. His defense of giving his blatantly unqualified girlfriend a high-paying job was that since there was no policy against this type of conduct, there was nothing unethical about it. Ethics is good conduct as determined by the values and customs of society. Professions publicize codes of ethics precisely because the law cannot prescribe all inappropriate or harmful behavior. The greater the problem with it is that it omits the concept of ethics at all. Ethical conduct is self-motivated, based on the individual's values and the internalized desire to do the right thing. My investigation found that the CFO assumed that people only need to behave ethically if there is a tangible government-enforced penalty for not doing so, and that not incurring a penalty, that is, not breaking the law, is, by definition, ethical. Of course, this is nonsense. It is wrong to intentionally mix up the ethical consciousness of the public, and the CFO's statement simply reinforces a misunderstanding of right and wrong. The compliance dodge. Simply put, Compliance with rules, including laws, isn't the same as ethics. Compliance depends on an individual's desire to avoid punishment. Ethical conduct arises from an individual's genuine desire to do the right thing. The most unethical person in the world will comply if the punishment is severe enough. But if he or she can do something unethical without breaking the rules, watch out. No set of rules will apply in all situations, and one who is determined to look for loopholes in a set of laws or rules or in an ethics code so that he or she can do something self-serving, dishonest, or dastardly, is likely to find a way. This is one reason why ethics programs emphasize compliance are largely ineffective. By emphasizing compliance over ethics, such programs encourage the search for loopholes. Remember that when Enron's board realized that one of its financial maneuvers violated its code of ethics, it made compliance possible by changing the code. The slippery slope. Many argue that if no tangible harm arises from a deception or other unethical act, it cannot be wrong. No harm, no foul. This is truly a deceptive myth because it can lead an individual to disregard the unethical nature of an action and look only to the results of the action. Before too long, one has embraced the ends justifies the means as an ethical system otherwise known as the terrorism standard. Closely related is the white lie syndrome, which embodies the theory that small ethical transgressions are not ethical transgressions at all. Both carry the same trap. The practice of ethics is based upon habit, and one who habitually behaves unethically in small ways is nonetheless building the habit of unethical behavior. Incremental escalations in the unethical nature of the facts, if not inevitable, are certainly common. Therefore, even an unethical act that causes no direct harm to others can harm the individual by setting him or her on the slippery slope. Cognitive dissonance is an innately human process that can confuse the ethical values of an individual without him or her even realizing that it's happening. The most basic of cognitive dissonance scenarios occurs when a person whom an individual regards highly adopts a behavior that the same individual criticizes. The gap between the individual's admiration of the person, a positive attitude, and the individual's objection to the behavior, a negative attitude, must be reconciled. The individual can lower his or her estimation of the person, or develop a rationalization for the conflict. The person was acting uncharacteristically due to illness, stress, or confusion, or reduce the disapproval of the behavior. This is why misbehavior by leaders and others admired role models is potentially very harmful on a large scale. By creating dissonance, it creates a downward drag on business norms by validating unethical behavior. It's for a good cause. This rationalization has probably caused more issues than any other. The words, "it's for a good cause," have been used to justify all sorts of lies, scams, and frauds. It is the downfall of the true believer and the passionate advocate that almost any action that supports the cause, whether it be meeting targets or achieving milestones, is seen as being justified by the inherent rightness of the ultimate goal. If I don't do it, somebody else will. It is a famous and time-honored rationalization that sidesteps doing the right thing because the wrong thing is certain to occur anyway. That is why middle managers go along with corporate mischief ordered by their bosses, making the calculation that their refusal will only hurt them without preventing the damage they have been asked to cause. The logic is faulty and self-serving, of course. Sometimes someone else won't do it. Nobody's perfect, or everybody makes mistakes. This is a legitimate defense if, in fact, an individual has been accused of not being perfect. Usually, however, it is an attempt to minimize the significance of genuine misconduct. When an act suggests that more than an honest mistake or single instance of bad judgment was involved, and that an individual's conduct indicates a broader lack of character or ethical sensitivity. Nobody's perfect, and everybody makes mistakes are not only inappropriate and irrelevant, but are presumably efforts to change the subject. The fact that nobody is perfect does not mean that it isn't necessary and appropriate to point out unethical conduct when it occurs. It also does not argue for failing to make reasonable assumptions about the ethical instincts of the individual if and when the unethical nature of conduct strongly suggests that it is not an irregularity but a symptom. Though nobody is perfect and everyone makes mistakes, we are still accountable for the mistakes we make. It isn't just small lies that lead down a slippery slope to corruption. Small but unethical shortcuts, lazy mistakes, careless inattention, and routine sloppiness do so as well. Not only does the accumulation of little wrongs, incompetence, and indiscretions erode values, cultural norms, and efficiency, it also eventually undermines the mission and goals as well. Don't sweat the small stuff is the mark of a bad leader who encourages and fosters bad management. Without a doubt, there are more rationalizations for unethical behavior, but hopefully these examples demonstrate that rationalization is required for unethical behavior. Ethical safeguards. You can enhance implementation advice by considering whether decision makers should create ethical safeguards to reduce the threat of unethical behavior or to mitigate harm. For example, in a retail environment, a company could institute a monitoring system in conjunction with other activities to ensure that staff are properly trained about socially acceptable worker conditions. The company could also penalize employees for violations. The following is a list of examples of ethical safeguards: education and training on ethical behavior, policies and procedures, strong internal control and risk management, adequate corporate governance, requirements to adhere to professional and ethical standards, policies and procedures, external monitoring of compliance with ethical policies and procedures, and disciplinary processes. Integrity is an important fundamental element of the CFE profession. Integrity requires CFEs to be honest, candid, and forthright with a client's financial information. CFEs should restrict themselves from personal gain or advantage using confidential information, while errors or differences in opinion regarding the applicability of financial accounting laws do exist. Professional CFEs should avoid the intentional opportunity to deceive and manipulate financial information. Objectivity and independence. Objectivity and independence are important ethical values in the CFE profession. CFEs must remain free from conflicts of interest and other questionable business relationships when conducting investigative services. Failure to remain objective and independent may hamper a CFE's ability to provide an honest opinion about a company's financial and non-financial information. Due care and competence. CFEs are required to maintain professional knowledge and skill at the level required to ensure that a client or employer receives competent professional services based on current developments in practice, legislation, and techniques, and act diligently and in accordance with applicable technical and professional standards. The principle of professional competence and due care imposes the following obligations on all professional CFEs: to maintain professional knowledge and skill at the level required to ensure that clients or employers receive competent professional service, and to act diligently in accordance with applicable technical and professional standards when providing professional services. The maintenance of professional competence requires a continuing awareness and an understanding of relevant technical, professional, and business developments. Continuing professional development enables a CFE to develop and maintain the capabilities to perform competently within the professional environment. Diligence encompasses the reasonability to act in accordance with the requirements of an assignment carefully, thoroughly, and on a timely basis. A CFE needs to take responsible steps to ensure that those working under their authority in a professional capacity have appropriate training and supervision. Where appropriate, a CFE should make clients, employers, or other users of the CFE's professional services aware of the limitations inherent in the service or services. Due care is the ethical value requiring CFEs to observe all technical or ethical standards. CFEs are often required to review generally accepted principles and apply this framework to a company's specific financial or non-financial information. Due care requires CFEs to exercise competence, diligence, and a proper understanding of the information. Competence is usually based on individuals' education and experience. Therefore, due care may require senior investigators to supervise and direct other investigators with less experience in the profession. Ethical standards. CFEs must abide by ethical standards and that regulate what kind of business they conduct, who they serve, and how they use their skills. Ethical standards are determined largely by the ACFE. Obviously, as CFEs, we are expected to adhere and ensure these ethical standards are maintained. Competence is one of the key ethical standards CFE professionals must uphold. To be competent, CFEs must not only have secured education and practice that prepares them for their positions, but they must also continue that education by learning new information that can affect their practices, similarly what we're doing today. CFEs must be objective, avoiding conflicts of interest. They must not, for instance, perform investigative services for firms that they have a vested interest in. Even if they can conduct themselves objectively, working for a company owned by a relative, for example, would not look objective and could cast doubt on the professional's intentions. When working with a client's information, CFEs have access to a great deal of personal information. This is not only limited to financial information, but also includes the names and contact information of employees, as well as the names and locations of firms with which the company does business and the company client list, just to name a few. Ethical standards require CFEs to keep that information private, except when ordered to disclose it by court or by court of law. It almost goes without saying that CFEs must not use this information to gain unethical or illegal advantage.
Hi, so hopefully you've been enjoying the video so far. Now's a good time to take a break. When we come back, we're going to really get into some case examples and let you put on the hat of making the ethical decisions. And hopefully you found it helpful and you find the rest helpful. So take that break and please push play when you want to continue. Thank you.
Say what? Dear Robot Ethicist, Mr. Anderson pays me $6 an hour to mow his lawn. It usually takes me 2 hours, but last week I got it done 30 minutes faster. He already paid me in advance. Is it ethical for me to keep the money? From Amber. You're the paper's new ethics columnist? Okay, let's see your response. Dear Amber, ethical schmethical, just live in the moment. Best, Moby. Do you even know what ethics is? Alright, how should I begin? If you've ever watched a nature video, you may have noticed that animals behave a little selfishly. They act on their urges without much regard for other creatures. People are a little different. We care about how our actions will affect others. But we are part of the animal kingdom, so we still struggle with selfish urges. We want stuff for ourselves, whether it's food and money, or more complex things like love and popularity. Can you imagine what would happen if everyone acted on these desires? Yep, total breakdown in society. Fortunately, we've evolved a sense of morality, or right and wrong. This sense guides us to believe in certain values. Lying is wrong, kindness is good, that sort of thing. Values, in turn, help us make ethical decisions, choices that we feel good about. So you can think of ethics as a set of guidelines for behaving morally. Well, let's take this first letter of yours. If you take $12 for mowing the lawn in 90 minutes, your wage will be $8 an hour. That's deceptive because you agreed to work for $6 an hour, and lying is morally wrong. Why? Well, our inner moral sense tells us it is. That's why so many ethical systems forbid it. Most religions and philosophies frown on dishonesty. And our legal codes prohibit certain kinds of lying, too. It's a crime to make false statements to the police or in a court of law. And if you're in business, it's illegal to make false claims to the public. It might help Amber to imagine herself in Mr. Anderson's place. No one likes being lied to. Mr. Anderson might not trust her to mow his lawn again if he finds out. Amber should admit that it only took 90 minutes to mow the lawn and offer to give $3 back. She might lose a couple bucks, but her reputation is more important than money. Anyway, that was an easy one. What else have you got? Dear Robot Ethicist, yesterday I caught my friend Steve cheating off my test. He's never done it before, and he begged me to keep it secret. If his parents find out, he'll be grounded for weeks. What should I do? From Anthony. This one's a bit trickier. We know that cheating is wrong, and every school has rules against it. On the other hand, friendship carries its own ethical obligations. Friends should be loyal and try to help each other out. By telling your teacher, you'd be betraying Steve. Yep, it looks like we've got an ethical dilemma, a situation with no clear-cut right answer. It may seem silly, but making a list of arguments for each action can be super helpful. The school code prohibits cheating, and you can get in trouble if your teacher finds out. But your friend will fail the test and get grounded if you say something. Still, friendship cuts both ways. It wasn't fair for Steve to put you in this position. There are definitely more reasons to speak up than stay quiet. Unfortunately, there is no formula for acting ethically. You have to judge by the individual situation. Ask yourself, what solution is fairest to all the people involved? Maybe you and Steve could go to your teacher together and tell her about the situation. Steve could ask for a makeup test or promise to do extra credit to keep his grades up. That way, he won't get away with cheating, and you won't betray his trust. Nope, I was happy to help, but it wouldn't be ethical for me to answer all your letters. You're going to have to rely on your own moral compass for the rest of these. This explains so many things.
Protecting our profession. No business is exempt from ethical behavior and practices. However, those dealing with money and sensitive personal and company information must adhere to strict ethics and integrity standards. This is imperative to gain and retain the trust of clients, coworkers, the public, and business partners. Integrity is generally considered one component in the ethical standards of CFEs. So, what is exactly needed? Professional skill and competence. Investigation is a detail-oriented career that requires knowledge and skills to do the job correctly. Mistakes lead to problems with investors, business partners, finance leaders, and the tax department. It is imperative that anyone working at any level in an investigation understands what is required of the job and how to execute properly. Confidentiality of information. CFEs see the good, the bad, and the ugly of a company or a person's situation. Clients have a right to know that this information is kept in the strictest of confidentiality and is only shared with other professionals if consultation is required to address a specific problem. And even then, in most instances, clients' consent is required. Failure to keep information confidential could result in bad publicity and possible defamation of a company or person and, by default, the whole CFE profession. It could also open the door to fraud, identity theft, and other illegal activities if the information is shared with the wrong parties. Honesty and integrity standards. Integrity covers a lot of different ethical standards that include honesty and professional conduct in all circumstances. A CFE should always present the facts objectively and refrain from biasing information in a misleading way. A CFE who doesn't demonstrate a high level of integrity isn't trustworthy and loses the confidence of clients. This could have a dramatic impact on our profession and could erode public trust. Independence and objectivity. Most CFEs advise clients in some respect on investing and financial services. It is important that CFEs maintain a fiduciary responsibility, seeking an objective solution and providing advice based on that objectivity. Professionalism and demeanor. Professionalism is a standard that goes beyond the office. Whether at a networking event or at a party, maintaining a professional demeanor is good business. CFEs should be law-abiding citizens who don't have bad habits, such as gambling, that could put them in a risky position to compromise client information. No one trusts an investigator who gets drunk at a party and starts spouting off information that probably is bound by confidentiality standards. Threats to independence. A self-interest threat occurs when a firm or person on the engagement team could benefit from a financial interest in or other self-interest conflict with a client. For example, a direct financial interest or material indirect financial interest in a public company where the CFE or CFE's firm has been engaged to perform an investigation. A self-review threat occurs when any product or judgment from a previous engagement needs to be evaluated in reaching a conclusion on a particular engagement, or when a person on the engagement team was previously an officer or director of the client, or was in a position to exert significant influence over the subject matter. For example, a person on the engagement team being or having recently been an officer or director of the client. An advocacy threat occurs when a firm or person on the engagement team promotes or may be perceived to promote a client's position or opinion to the point that objectivity may be or may be perceived to be impaired. A familial threat occurs when, by virtue of a close relationship with a client, its directors, officers, or employees, a firm, or a person on the engagement team becomes too sympathetic to the client's interests. For example, a person on the engagement team having an immediate or close family member who is an officer or director of the client. An intimidation threat occurs when a person on the engagement team may be deterred from acting objectively and exercising professional skepticism by threats, actual or perceived, from the directors, officers, or employees of a client. For example, the threat of being replaced due to a disagreement with the application of an accounting principle. Safeguards. Members and firms have an ongoing responsibility to comply with the rules by taking into account the context in which they practice. The threats to independence and the safeguards which may be available to eliminate the threats or reduce them to an acceptable level. Safeguards fall into three broad categories. Safeguards created by the profession, legislation, or regulation. They include the following: education, training, and practical experience requirements for entry into the profession, continuing education programs, professional standards, external practice inspection, disciplinary processes, members' practice advisory services, participation by members of the public in oversight and governance of the profession, and legislation governing the independence requirements of the firm and its members. Safeguards within the client may include the following: employees of the client who are competent to make management decisions, policies and procedures that emphasize the client's commitment to report fairness. However, it is not possible to solely rely on safeguards within the client to reduce threats to an acceptable level. Safeguards within the firm's own systems and procedures may include firm-wide safeguards such as the following: the tone from the top, firm leadership that stresses the importance of independence and the expectation that persons on the engagement teams will act in the public interest, policies and procedures to implement and monitor quality control of engagements, documented independence policies regarding the identification of threats to independence, the evaluation of their significance, and the identification and application of appropriate safeguards to eliminate or reduce the threats, other than those that are clearly insignificant to an acceptable level. Professional behavior. CFEs must conduct themselves at all times in a manner which will maintain the good reputation of the profession and serve the public interest. In doing so, members and firms are expected to avoid any action that would discredit the profession. There are business considerations involved in the creation and development of an organization, whether it is a professional practice or an entity that operates outside of that domain. A member's involvement in any organization should be based primarily upon a reputation for professional excellence. In particular, members who occupy positions of senior authority should recognize that positions include an obligation to influence events, practices, and attitudes within that organization. Accordingly, such members should encourage an ethics-based culture in their organization that emphasizes the importance of ethical behavior and compliance with generally accepted standards of practice of the profession. At all times, members and firms are expected to act in relation to other professional colleagues with the courtesy and consideration they would expect to be given by their professional colleagues. Integrity and due care. Members and firms are expected to be straightforward, honest, and fair dealing in all professional relationships. They are also expected to act diligently and in accordance with applicable technical and professional standards when providing professional services. Diligence includes the responsibility to act in respect of any professional service carefully, thoroughly, and on a timely basis. Members are required to ensure that those performing professional services under their authority have adequate training and supervision. A person who acts with honesty and truthfulness and whose actions, values, and principles are consistent is described as having integrity. Objectivity is a state of mind, which has regard to all considerations that are relevant, but disregards those that are not. An objective person does not allow bias, conflict of interest, or the influence of others to compromise judgment. The judgment of an objective person is intellectually honest. Objectivity should not be confused with neutrality or impartiality. Professional services and fiduciary duties. Members are reminded that they may also be performing professional services when serving in the capacity of a volunteer and accordingly are subject to the requirement for objectivity when acting in that capacity. Members and firms have a professional duty to act with integrity and due care and a contractual duty to provide service as defined by the terms of their engagement or employment. In certain cases, the relationship between a member or firm and those to whom they provide professional services could also be one that the courts describe as a fiduciary relationship that gives rise to fiduciary duties. Depending on the particular facts and circumstances, members who are employees may have a fiduciary relationship with their employers. The concepts of fiduciary relationship and fiduciary duty are derived from the law of trusts. The obligations of a fiduciary can be onerous, and the implications of being in breach of a fiduciary duty can be significant. If there is any question as to whether a fiduciary relationship exists, legal advice should be obtained. Clients, employers, and the public generally expect that a member or firm bring the qualities of objectivity, integrity, and due care to all professional services. Objectivity and advocacy. So advocacy while still maintaining objectivity and integrity, and the concern of impairing the reputation of the member, firm, client, and employer. The requirement for an objective state of mind does not preclude a member or firm from acting in an advocacy role for a client or from working to advance the best interests of an employer. A member's or firm's effectiveness as an advocate in these cases is based on professional credibility, which is sustained by objectivity and integrity, in addition to competence. However, a member or firm must consider the ability to effectively advocate the client's or employer's position, while still maintaining objectivity and integrity. It may be possible to do so when the advocacy role is apparent in the circumstances and the position being advocated is supportable. In any advocacy service, there is a possibility that circumstances may arise which stretch the bounds of performance standards, go beyond sound and reasonable professional or commercial practice, or compromise credibility. Such circumstances may pose an unacceptable risk of impairing the reputation of the member, firm, client, and/or employer. In these circumstances, the member or firm should consider whether it is appropriate to perform the service. A member or firm must remain conscious of the need to remain objective and act with integrity in the conduct of all professional services, and must continually assess and manage the risks to objectivity and integrity. Professional competence. A member shall sustain professional competence by keeping informed of and complying with developments in professional standards in all functions in which the member provides professional services or is relied upon because of the member's calling. CFEs must maintain their professional skills and competence by keeping informed of and complying with developments in their area of professional service. Clients, employers, and the public generally expect the investigative profession to maintain a high level of competence. This underscores the need for maintaining individual professional skill and competence by keeping abreast of and complying with developments in the professional standards and pertinent legislation in all functions where a member or firm performs professional services, or where others rely upon a member's or firm's work. This is probably a good place to remind you that the ACFE Code of Professional Conduct provides guidance and rules to all members in the performance of your professional responsibilities. The principles provide the framework for the rules that govern the performance and of your professional responsibilities. Point blank, members must adhere to the rules of the code. Compliance with the rules depends primarily on members' understanding and voluntary actions. Secondarily, on reinforcement by peers and public opinion, and ultimately on disciplinary proceedings, when necessary, against members who fail to comply with these rules. Members must be prepared to justify departures from these rules. Confidentiality. The principle of confidentiality forces members to protect and maintain the confidentiality of information both outside of and within a member's firm or employing organization, and to properly address a situation that may arise when confidentiality is breached. The disclosure of confidential information by a member or firm may be required or appropriate where such disclosure is permitted or authorized by the client or employer, required by law, or permitted or required by a professional right or duty when not prohibited by law. Confidential client information is any information obtained from the client that is not available to the public. Information that is available to the public includes, but is not limited to, information in a book, periodical, newspaper, or similar publication, in a client document that has been released by the client to the public or that has otherwise become a matter of public knowledge, on publicly accessible websites, databases, online discussion forums, or other electronic media by which members of the public can access the information, released or disclosed by the client or other third parties in media interviews, speeches, testimony in a public forum, presentations made at seminars or trade association meetings, panel discussions, earnings press release calls, investor calls, analyst sessions, investor conference presentations, or a similar public forum, maintained by or filed with regulatory or governmental bodies that is available to the public, or obtained from other public sources, unless the particular client information is available to the public. I'll say that again. Unless the particular client information is available to the public, such information should be considered confidential client information. Members are advised that sharing, publicizing, and/or advertising a connection to a client can be considered a breach of confidentiality. It has taken years to build a good reputation for the profession, but only seconds to destroy it.
Regardless of what type of investigative career you have, what people hear and think about CFEs, even before they've met you, matters. A good reputation is not something that is achieved overnight. It is the product of consistent behavior over time. It is earned. Clearly, having a good reputation brings many opportunities. CFEs are highly recommended for jobs to maintain the public acceptance, to be viewed as experts in their industry, to contribute to the community at large, and remember, it's a privilege to belong to the ACFE, not a right. When asked what CFEs do, responses often mention roles such as investigators and court experts. The functions performed by the vast number of professionals who work in businesses are often forgotten and not well understood. What do the independent director, the internal auditor, and the chief financial officer of companies all have in common? The individuals in these positions could all be CFEs working in businesses. Besides these roles, CFEs take on a diverse selection of other roles in businesses of all sorts, including in the public sector, non-for-profit sector, regulatory and for professional bodies, and academia. Their wide-ranging work and experience find commonality in one aspect, their knowledge of investigating. Members are reminded that the term employer is defined to include, among other things, an individual or organization that obtains professional services from a member on a voluntary basis. Accordingly, members providing professional services with or without remuneration are also governed by this rule. For example, when serving an organization such as a non-for-profit or charitable organization, a member or firm shall not, without consent, in connection with any transaction involving a client or an employer, hold, receive, bargain for, become entitled to, or acquire, directly or indirectly, any fee, remuneration, or benefit for personal advantage or for the advantage of a third party without the consent of the client or employer, as the case may be. Conflicts of interest. Conflict of interest starts with conducting a conflict search. Were any conflicts identified? The conflict could be perceived or actual. Are the conflicts solely business conflicts that can be managed? Can agreement to act be inferred from the client's conduct in keeping with commonly accepted principles? Can the conflicts be managed? Can you develop a conflict management plan? Will the plan be effective? And you've got to review periodically for new conflicts. What if they arise? So conflicts are a very important aspect to the work that we do. If we want to be able to go up in court and testify as an expert, the key word there is independence. And independence is demonstrated by ensuring that there is no conflict of interest, that there would be nothing that would cause a bias. Can you just imagine if you were doing an investigation for a company where you had an investment in? If you had that investment in that company, it would be perceived that whatever it is that you were to find would be biased because it would affect your investment. Contingent fees. A member or firm is entitled to charge for professional services such fees as the member or firm considers to be fair and reasonable for the work undertaken. Generally, it is prudent to refer to fees and the basis on which they are to be computed in an engagement letter to the client or potential client. When providing a professional service for a contingent fee, a member or firm must bear in mind the requirements. The rules require a member or firm to perform services with integrity and due care. To sustain professional competence in all functions in which the member practices, not to associate with any letter, report, statement, or representation which the member or firm knows or should know is false or misleading, and to comply with generally accepted standards of practice of the profession. When permitted to provide a professional service on a contingent fee basis, a member or firm also must ensure that such a contingent fee arrangement does not, in the view of a reasonable observer, create an influence which would impair professional judgment or objectivity with respect to another engagement for the same client which requires objectivity on the part of the member or firm. Members and firms are cautioned that professional engagements may be subject to standards of other professional bodies or organizations
which must be considered in determining whether contingent fees are appropriate for a particular engagement. In all such cases, the higher or more stringent standard must be applied. Advertising. It is in the public interest and the interest of all members and firms that members and firms be allowed to advertise or otherwise promote services available on the basis of fees charged. Members or firms should be able to receive publicity, identifying them as members or firms in areas which reflect their competence and knowledge, in matters which are within the scope of activities of members, and in matters of community or public interest. Advertising and publicity should contribute to public respect for the profession and consequently to the professional standing of all members. It is the responsibility of the member or firm to ensure that any promotional material produced by or under the control of the member or firm is factual and that any commentary is not misleading. The objective is to ensure that advertising or other promotional communication is accurate and factual. A member or firm may be the subject of or may be referred to in news stories, including interviews and commentaries, or may publish any work, including any professional paper, report, article, etc., related to the member's or firm's professional services, provided that the member or firm uses all best efforts to ensure that none of the contents of such news story or work violates the requirements of advertising. It is not appropriate for members and firms to use advertising or promotional communications or media, including electronic media, that bring disrepute on the profession. Individuals who have earned the designation CFE have demonstrated a high level of education and professional experience. To hold oneself out as a specialist is to imply possession of particular skills, talents, and experience. Specialization must be distinguished from expertise. Expertise implies extraordinary knowledge about a specific subject, no matter how broad or how narrow. Specialization implies a concentration of professional skills developed and applied over a meaningful period of time. A person may be an expert without being a specialist. Members or firms designated themselves or related businesses or practices as specialists must be prepared to substantiate the claim. Failure to provide advice to a specialist after accepting an engagement to do so may have serious legal consequences. Sometimes, more than one alternative is ethically permitted. Then you must choose the most ethical alternative. Sometimes you will find that none of the alternatives seem viable. Each alternative seems to violate at least one ethical constraint, would cause unjustified harm, would typically be viewed as unethical, or employs a rationalization. Suppose you work for a company that operates a chain of retail clothing stores. A considerable amount of inventory is purchased from a factory located in a country where activist groups have raised questions about working conditions. The local economy is highly dependent on the factory. Your company's website states that it purchases only from suppliers who commit to safe working conditions, and it requires each of its suppliers to sign a statement that includes specific promises about working conditions. Nevertheless, your company recently received clear evidence of unsafe conditions, including unreasonable work hours and worker injuries at the factory. While an alternative might be to continue using the supplier, which would violate company policy and most likely lead to additional worker harm. Another alternative might be to stop using the supplier, which could lead to unnecessary harm to workers and the local economy as jobs are lost. Neither alternative satisfies the criteria to be ethically permitted, but a decision is still required. The better choice would involve ethical trade-offs such as those shown on the slide. Perhaps the least harm would come to workers if the company continues buying from the factory. Case number 1. Now we're going to talk about a few cases. We're going to talk about some ideas behind them, and I'm going to let you think for a few minutes about a solution, and then we will take it up. So, improper accounting for sales. You're engaged by one of 5 partners in a firm of accountants. 4 years ago, the firm was appointed as external accountants to a young, successful, and fast-growing company. engaged to prepare year-end accounts and tax returns. The business had started with a handful of employees, but now has a workforce of 400. While still remaining below the size of a company requiring a statutory audit. Due to one of the partner's close relationships with the directors of the company, who are its owners, and several of its staff, you become aware that staff purchases of goods manufactured by the company are authorized by production managers and then processed outside the accounting system. The proceeds from these sales are used to fund the firm's holiday party. So we need to think about some possible courses of actions, and we've got funding of the holiday party. Having brought the issue to the attention of the partner and obtained the relevant details of the client system for accounting for staff sales, you should raise your concerns with the other partners and discuss communication to the directors of the client company. You should strongly advise the partners that a sales policy should be introduced to ensure that these sales are fully recorded in the company's accounting system in the future. You should explain to the partners the implications of the director's actions and that you are safeguarding the interests of the company and its staff in advising how the situation may be rectified. If the partners do not want to communicate and resolve the issue with the directors, you should suggest disassociating the firm from any involvement with the company financial statements, and this will require them to resign as the company's accountant. You should document in detail the steps that you take in resolving your dilemma in case your ethical judgment is challenged in the future. Case number 2. You are a sole practitioner who used to provide a range of financial services for a small company that owns a hardware shop in the town where you practice. Following a brief retendering process, the client chose to engage an alternative firm. Both you and the other firm had been asked to tender for a range of services, including the preparation of year-end accounts, tax compliance work, and due diligence exercise in respect of the intended purchase of a small hardware business in the neighboring town. You believe that you were unsuccessful in the tendering process on the basis of cost alone, as Company A is not very profitable and suffers from the competition of the other hardware business that it intends to acquire. You are the continuity provider for another local sole practitioner. 2 months ago, he suffered a heart attack, and so you are currently acting for a number of his clients. He is not expected to resume practicing for another 2 months. One of the clients of the incapacitated practitioner, Company B, operates a shop selling electrical goods. The director and majority shareholder has called you to arrange a meeting to discuss a business venture that he is considering. At the meeting, the client explains that he intends to make an offer for the same small hardware business that Company A is seeking to acquire. He is aware that there is another bidder for the business, but is unaware that it is Company A or that Company A used to be your client. When the meeting is over, you start to feel uneasy. You want to help Company B and provide a valued service on behalf of the practitioner for whom you are the continuity provider. But you realize that you are also in possession of confidential information concerning the plans of your previous client. You are aware of Company A's problems and its motivations for wishing to acquire the business. Key fundamental principles. So integrity. You must be straightforward and honest. Confidentiality. How will you ensure that you do not use confidential information relating to your previous client to the advantage of Company B? Professional behavior. How will you safeguard your reputation and that of your profession? Possible course of action. You must not disclose to the director or Company B any confidential information gained from your former relationship with Company A, nor may you use the information for the advantage of Company B or for your own personal benefit. Your problem is complicated by the fact that you are obliged to act for certain clients under the continuity agreement. However, you must remove or reduce to an acceptable level the threat to the fundamental principle of confidentiality. This may be achieved by openly declaring the conflict to the director of Company B. Even so, you must exercise very careful judgment when determining how much information can or cannot be shared. In the first instance, you should evaluate the threat to the principle of confidentiality brought about by conflicting interests of your current client and your previous client. In this case, you are likely to conclude that it is significant, even if you believe that the threat can be managed while you assist Company B in its bid for the target business. This may not be the perception of a reasonable and informed third party. Therefore, you should consider declaring the conflict of interest between Company A and Company B and explaining that you cannot act on behalf of Company B in respect of the proposed bid for the target business. You still have a responsibility to your previous client, but if you need to disclose this fact to the director of Company B, you should not mention the name of that client. Such disclosure should be documented. If pressure is put upon you to disclose the name of the other bidder, you should resist. Under such circumstances, it may be advisable to disengage from the client completely in order to effectively safeguard the threat to confidentiality. This will be a measure of last resort, as you are expected to provide continuity of service to Company B and also act in the interests of the practitioner who is incapacitated. You should keep the incapacitated practitioner informed, if possible. In any event, you should document in detail the steps that you take in resolving your dilemma in case your unethical judgment is challenged in the future. Case study number 3. You are a trainee CFE in your second year of training within a small practice. A more senior trainee has been on sick leave, and you are due to go on study leave. You have been told by your manager that before you go on leave, you must complete some complicated reconciliation work. The deadline suggested appears unrealistic given the complexity of the work. You feel that you are not sufficiently experienced to complete the work alone. You would need additional supervision to complete it to the required standard, and your manager appears unable to offer the necessary support. If you try to complete the work within the proposed time frame but fail to meet the expected quality, you could face repercussions on your return from study leave. You feel slightly intimidated by your manager and also feel pressure to do what you can for the practice in what are challenging times. Let's first talk about the key fundamental principles affected. So, integrity. These are the things that you need to start thinking about. Can you be open and honest about the situation? Would it be right to attempt to complete work that is technically beyond your abilities without proper supervision? Professional competence and due care. Is it possible to complete the work within the time available and still act diligently to achieve the required quality of output? Professional behavior. Can you refuse to perform the work without damaging your reputation within the practice? Alternatively, could the reputation of the practice suffer if you attempt to perform the work? Considerations. Identify relevant facts. The practice that employs you is small and under pressure due to the sickness of a member of staff. However, the work you are being asked to perform is beyond the usual ability of a trainee at your level. Determine whether the deadline can be extended, when your colleague is expected to return from sick leave, and what other resources might be available to the practice. Consider the policies and procedures of the practice, as well as your professional body's code of ethics. Identify affected parties. Key affected parties are you, your manager, the practice, its other employees, and the client. Who should be involved in the resolution? In the first instance, you should attempt to resolve the issue with your manager, although it may be necessary to involve the person responsible for training within the practice. You might, at an appropriate stage, suggest that the client be involved. So now I just want you to take a couple of minutes and think to yourself of a possible course of action. And if you want, you can push pause here, and then we can continue. That way I can just continue and you just won't have a lot of dead air. You should explain to your manager that you do not have sufficient time and experience to complete the work to a satisfactory standard. However, you should demonstrate a constructive attitude and suggest how the problem may be resolved. Your professional body is available to advise you in this respect. For example, You might suggest the use of a subcontract bookkeeper or contacting the client to inquire if the deadline might be extended so that the work may be performed when you return from study leave or when your colleague returns from sick leave. You might also explore the possibility of assigning another member of staff to supervise your work. If you feel that your manager is being unsympathetic or simply fails to understand the issue, you should consider how best to raise the matter with the person within the practice responsible for training. It would be diplomatic to suggest to your manager that you raise the matter together and present your respective views. This would have the added advantage of involving a third party. It would be unethical to attempt to complete the work if you doubt your competence. However, simply refusing to or resigning from your employment would cause significant problems for both you and the practice. You could consult your professional body. If you seek advice from outside the practice, for example, legal advice, you should be mindful of the need for confidentiality as appropriate. You should document in detail the steps that you take in resolving your dilemma in case your ethical judgment is challenged in the future. Case study number 5. A junior member of staff has just returned to work after taking special leave to care for her elderly mother. For financial reasons, she needs to work full-time. She has been having difficulties with her mother's home care arrangements, causing her to miss a number of team meetings, which usually take place at the beginning of each day, and to leave work early. She is very competent in her work, but her absences are putting pressure on her and her overworked colleagues. You are her manager, and you are aware that the flow of work through the practice is coming under pressure. One of her male colleagues is beginning to make comments such as, "A woman's place is in the home," and is undermining her at every opportunity, putting her under even greater stress. Key fundamental principles. Integrity. You need to be fair to all those involved and act in a straightforward manner. Confidentiality. You owe a duty of confidentiality to the staff involved. Professional behavior. How should you proceed so as not to discredit yourself, your profession, or the practice for which you work? Considerations. Let's identify the relevant facts. Consider the firm's policies, procedures, and guidelines, best practice, and, with legal assistance if required, applicable laws and regulations. Is there a staff handbook or similar internal publication? Consider whether it is your proper role to manage this sort of staff issue. Does the practice have a department responsible for personnel issues? Identify the affected parties. The key affected parties are you, the junior member of staff, and her colleagues. Other affected members of staff may be in the personnel department. Who should be involved in the resolution? Consider not just whom you should involve, but also why and when. Can your professional body provide advice and guidance? Do you have access to appropriate staff in the personnel department? Or are you able to consult an external organization for confidential advice? Let's talk about the possible course of action. And for those of you who just want to think it through, please push pause. Check the relevant facts. If necessary, clarify staff procedures with the personnel department. Take legal advice if required. Discuss the matter with the junior member of staff. Possible solutions may include suggesting a more flexible approach to team meetings. Do these always have to be in the morning? At times, working from home may be an option for the junior member of staff. You also need to deal with the other member of staff, who needs to be reminded about proper conduct and how such behavior may amount to harassment and be in breach of the practice's code of conduct. Considering the issues and trying to identify a solution enables you to demonstrate that you are behaving professionally and attempting to resolve the difficulties faced by the junior member of staff. Throughout, you must be seen to be acting fairly, both towards the junior member of staff, who is responsible for her mother's care, and towards the other members of staff. Having considered all reasonable compromises, if the conclusion is reached that the junior employee is unable to carry out the work for which she was employed, you must turn your attention to her ongoing employment within the practice. This will probably be out of your hands, and you should deliver the relevant facts to the personnel department or the owners of the practice. Appropriate confidentiality must be maintained at all times. You should document in detail the steps that you take in resolving your dilemma, in case your ethical judgment is challenged in the future. So here again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I just want to talk a bit in terms of what it is that we've looked at. So today we've looked at the code of ethics, the code of conduct. We've spoken about the characteristics that are required and needed in order to maintain ethics. We've spoken about maintaining professionalism and maintaining our profession, and the things that we need to make sure that we do, the ethical things that we need to make sure that we do, because it takes a long time to establish the ACFE and the CFEs in the business world and the world itself. And it's very easy to corrode the quality of the CFE if we do not maintain those standards. We've also looked at a few examples today that have given us insight into putting us in the chair of what is it that we're going to do now that we've got an ethical issue. We're looking at the key elements that it affects, we think about some key questions, and we work towards an answer. If an ethical concern comes up while you're working, one of the things that you want to think about is who it is that you can speak with in order to work out the situation and make sure that you have achieved an ethical solution. Is it somebody at work? Is it somebody within the CFE board? Is it a mentor? You've also got to make sure that you maintain confidentiality at the same time. One way of doing that is through a no-names basis and just giving the story to the individual and removing anybody's specific names or specific things that would identify the company or the case or the engagement, and then going through the scenario and coming up with what seems to be the right logical ethical answer. When doing this process of going through any ethical concerns, documentation is vital. It's vital because you need to be able to write down what it is that you've observed, what it is that you've seen, what it is, the evidence that you have, and the course of action you've taken, if later on someone were to come and question you on your choices and your decision making. Again, my name is David Malamed. This is my contact information, dmalamed@cgwca.com. You can also visit my website, uncoverfraud.com. Uncoverfraud.com has tons of resources, tons of free resources. There are hundreds of videos on fraud, different fraud topics. There's also hundreds of articles, again, on fraud topics, investigation, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. Thanks so much again. My name is David Malamed.
Hi, and welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed that 2-hour video on different types of ethical issues and how to deal with them. Ethics is something that is going to be ongoing and something that you're going to deal with for the rest of your career. It's not just the fraud and investigative work that we do, but it is also the question of, can we accept the work? Can we continue doing the work? Can we testify to the work? Are we independent? Is there a conflict? And those types of issues are always going to come around. Hopefully you have found this webinar interesting and informative. I've got 5 questions for you now to do, true or false, and please do not forget to make sure that you print out your certificate once you're done. Thanks again. My name is David Malamed. Please visit my website, uncoverfraud.com. There's tons of free videos and tons of articles on different fraud topics that hopefully you'll find useful. Thank you so much. God bless.